This presentation is based on FBI case files, court records, contemporary forensic evidence, and peer-reviewed historical research. The 2021 exoneration involved modern forensic testing and newly revealed prosecutor correspondence. All legal documentation cited has been verified through multiple sources, including the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, National Archives, and scholarly publications. In September 2021, forensic scientists at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement conducted tests that would finally expose one of the most systematic miscarriages of justice in American legal history. They analyzed a pair of men's pants, evidence that had been presented in a 1949 rape trial in Lake County, Florida. The prosecution had claimed these pants contained proof of sexual assault. 72 years later, advanced DNA testing revealed the truth. No semen was found. None. This wasn't a case that lacked evidence. This was a case where evidence was systematically fabricated. Witnesses were tortured into false confessions, and an entire legal system conspired to guarantee guilty verdicts against 4 innocent men whose only crime was being black in Jim Crow, Florida. For more deep dives into the documented evidence of systematic injustice, make sure to subscribe. What you're about to discover isn't just the story of 4 individuals. It's a blueprint for how legal terrorism operated across the American South, sanctioned by badges, courtrooms, and the silent complicity of an entire system designed to maintain white supremacy at any cost. The Groveland Four case haunted Thurgood Marshall for the rest of his life. By the time it was over, one man had been shot over 400 times by a mob, another executed by a sheriff while handcuffed, and a civil rights leader who dared demand justice was blown apart by a Christmas morning bomb. This is the anatomy of American terror, disguised as law enforcement. To understand what happened to Ernest Thomas, Charles Green Lee, Samuel Shepard, and Walter Irvin, you first need to understand the economic system that made their destruction inevitable. Lake County, Florida, in 1949, was the heart of the state's citrus industry. Orange groves stretched across thousands of acres, generating enormous wealth for a small group of white grove owners. But citrus is labor-intensive, particularly during harvest season, and the profitability of the entire enterprise depended on maintaining a large population of desperately poor, politically powerless black workers. This is where Sheriff Willis Thuthdave McCall comes in. At 6 feet 1 inch and 240 pounds, dressed in his trademark 10-gallon Stetson and size 13 cowboy boots, McCall wasn't just a law enforcement officer. He was the enforcer of an economic system. His job was to ensure a ready supply of low-wage workers and prevent any form of union organizing or political empowerment that might threaten the grove owners' profits. McCall understood that terror was more effective than law. During his 28-year reign as sheriff, he would be investigated 49 times and survive 5 different governors' attempts to remove him. He bragged about these statistics, understanding that each investigation that failed to stick only enhanced his reputation for untouchability. The system McCall enforced wasn't improvised. It was meticulously constructed through law. Florida's Jim Crow statutes of 1949 mandated complete racial segregation in all public facilities, prohibited interracial marriage under penalty of 2 to 5 years imprisonment, and maintained poll taxes designed to prevent black voting. But the real enforcement mechanism was extra-legal violence. Between 1889 and 1918, Florida had more lynchings per capita than any other state except Mississippi. By 1949, the methods had become more sophisticated. Systematic beatings in jail basements, justifiable homicides by law enforcement, and what contemporaries called legal lynching through manufactured court cases. On July 16, 1949, the system identified its next targets. Ernest Thomas, 26, was married and working in the citrus groves near Groveland. Samuel Shepard, 22, was a World War II Army veteran who continued wearing his uniform, a source of resentment among local whites who expected deference, not pride, from black men. Walter Irvin, 22, was also a veteran determined to find work beyond the orange groves that confined most black men to poverty wages. Charles Greenlee, just 16, had come to Groveland from Gainesville looking for work that Thomas had promised him. These four had never all been together in the same place at the same time. Some had never even met. But in the logic of Jim Crow terror, facts were irrelevant. What mattered was the message their destruction would send to the entire black community. Stay in your place or face annihilation. Norma Paget, a young white woman, claimed that she and her husband Willie were driving home from a dance when their car broke down near Groveland. According to her account, 4 black men initially stopped to help, but then attacked Willie and took turns raping her at gunpoint. Contemporary accounts reveal that locals immediately doubted this story. Norma and Willie's marriage was troubled, marked by Willie's drinking and suspected domestic violence. Several witnesses later reported seeing Willie with visible injuries before the alleged incident. The couple's story contained multiple inconsistencies that investigating officers ignored. But in Jim Crow, Florida, the truth of an accusation mattered less than its utility. A white woman claiming rape by black men provided the perfect pretext for the kind of systematic terror that kept the entire community in line. Sheriff McCall wasn't in Lake County when the accusation was made, but he rushed back to orchestrate what followed. By the morning of July 17th, he had assembled a posse of over 1,000 white men, farmers, grove workers, Ku Klux Klan members, and thrill seekers united in their desire for blood. Ernest Thomas understood what this meant. As the only one of the 4 who had actually been near the area that night, he knew he would be the primary target. He fled Lake County, traveling nearly 200 miles northwest to Madison County, hoping distance might save his life. He was wrong. The posse tracked him for days through the Florida swamps until they found him sleeping under a tree. Contemporary accounts describe what happened next. Thomas was shot over 400 times. The coroner's inquest ruled his death a justifiable homicide, though it was impossible to determine which of the mob had fired the fatal shots, or indeed, which shots were fired into a corpse. Sheriff McCall was present when Thomas was killed. This wasn't law enforcement. It was a public execution designed to terrorize the entire black community. Meanwhile, Greenlee, Shepard, and Irvin were experiencing their own hell. FBI documents, declassified decades later, provide graphic details of what happened in the basement of the Lake County Jail. Deputies James Yates and Leroy Campbell beat the 3 men with blackjacks, fists, and feet while demanding confessions. Attorney Franklin Williams documented the visible evidence. Shepard had scars on his head, broken teeth, lash marks across his back and chest, and wrist scars from being cuffed to a metal pipe. Irvin showed similar injuries plus an apparently fractured jaw. Greenlee, just 16 years old, had a bruised and swollen face, cuts around his neck and groin, swollen testicles, and numerous cuts on his feet. The FBI took photographs of these injuries, evidence that would later disappear from the case file shown to defense attorneys. Shepard and Greenlee eventually signed confessions just to stop the torture. Irvin refused to confess despite the beatings, maintaining his innocence throughout. An FBI investigation concluded definitively that deputies Yates and Campbell had violated the men's civil rights through these beatings. The Justice Department urged the U.S. Attorney in Tampa to file charges. U.S. Attorney Herbert Phillips refused, claiming insufficient evidence despite the FBI's photographs and witness testimony. This was the first cover-up, federal law enforcement documenting criminal civil rights violations by local police, only to have federal prosecutors refuse to act. The trial that followed was legal theater designed to provide the veneer of justice while guaranteeing predetermined outcomes. The prosecution had a secret weapon. They withheld the FBI investigation, the photographs of beatings, and the medical examination that showed no evidence of rape. Instead, they presented fabricated evidence. Deputy James Yates, the same man who had tortured the defendants, served as the prosecution's primary witness. He claimed to have found crucial evidence at the scene, evidence that 2021 forensic analysis would prove had been manufactured. The defense, led by NAACP attorney Franklin Williams, was denied access to the FBI files that documented the torture. They couldn't present the medical evidence that contradicted the rape allegation. They weren't allowed to call witnesses who could provide alibis for the defendants. The all-white jury deliberated for 77 minutes before convicting all 3 surviving men. Shepard and Irvin were sentenced to death. Green Lee, because he was a minor, received life in prison. This travesty attracted the attention of Thurgood Marshall, then the NAACP's chief legal strategist and future Supreme Court justice. Marshall was simultaneously preparing Brown versus Board of Education, the case that would end legal segregation, when the Groveland case consumed his attention. Marshall understood that this case represented everything wrong with American justice. In his Supreme Court brief, he argued that the defendants had been denied due process, not just through the beatings and manufactured evidence, but through the systematic exclusion of black citizens from juries and the poisonous pretrial publicity that made a fair trial impossible. On November 5, 1951, the Supreme Court unanimously overturned the convictions of Shepard and Irvin, ruling that the prejudicial influences and exclusion of black jurors had denied them constitutional rights. The court ordered new trials. It was a significant victory, and it signed the death warrants of the 2 men Marshall had just saved. Less than 24 hours after the Supreme Court victory, Sheriff McCall volunteered to transport Shepard and Irvin from Rayford State Prison back to Lake County for their new trial. It was a journey they would never complete. On a dark road outside Umatilla, Florida, McCall claimed his car had a flat tire. Alone with 2 handcuffed men, he forced them out of the vehicle. What happened next was captured in FBI reports that wouldn't surface for decades. McCall shot both men with his .38 caliber revolver. Samuel Shepard died instantly. Walter Irvin, struck in the neck, had the presence of mind to play dead until McCall shot him again. Incredibly, Irvin survived. McCall's official report claimed the handcuffed prisoners had somehow attacked him and tried to escape. When FBI agents interviewed Irvin from his hospital bed, he told a different story. McCall had simply dragged them from the car and opened fire without warning. Here's the evidence that proves McCall was lying. In 2021, investigators returned to the shooting scene and found McCall's .38 caliber bullet 10 inches below where Walter Irvin's blood had soaked into the earth. This physical evidence, combined with Irvin's testimony, conclusively demonstrates that McCall committed premeditated murder. The FBI knew this in 1951. They photographed the scene, documented the ballistics evidence, and interviewed witnesses. Yet once again, federal prosecutors refused to file charges. 6 weeks after the Roadside shooting, The system identified its next target: Harry T. Moore, executive director of the Florida NAACP, and the man who had publicly demanded McCall's suspension and indictment for murder. Moore was arguably the most effective civil rights organizer in the South. Between 1944 and 1950, his Progressive Voters League had registered over 100,000 black voters across Florida, more than any other southern state. He had investigated every lynching in Florida since 1943, documenting patterns of violence and demanding federal intervention. Moore represented everything the citrus barons and their enforcer Sheriff McCall feared most: organized black political power. His voter registration campaigns threatened the entire economic structure that depended on disenfranchised labor. His investigations of police violence exposed the terror that maintained white supremacy. By 1951, Florida was experiencing what newspapers called the Florida Terror, a wave of bombings targeting black communities, civil rights activists, and even Jewish synagogues. The Ku Klux Klan was conducting a coordinated campaign of terrorism designed to halt the growing civil rights movement. December 25, 1951 was Harry and Harriet Moore's 25th wedding anniversary. They had delayed opening Christmas presents to wait for their daughter Evangeline, who was traveling home from Washington, D.C. by train. The Moores lived in a small wood-frame house in Mims, Florida, surrounded by citrus groves. It was an isolated location, perfect for what the killers had planned. At 10:20 p.m., a dynamite bomb exploded directly under the Moores' bedroom floor. The blast was so powerful that witnesses reported hearing it miles away. The explosion splintered the floorboards, collapsed the ceiling, and destroyed the front porch. Harry Moore died while being transported to Fernald Lawton Hospital in Sanford, the nearest facility that would treat black patients, 30 miles away. Harriet survived long enough to attend her husband's funeral before dying from her injuries 9 days later. Their daughter, who was still at home, was physically unharmed but psychologically devastated. The family's Christmas tree remained standing in the wreckage, a surreal monument to violence that would define American racial terrorism. Recent investigations have revealed the sophisticated planning behind the Moore assassination. The killers had obtained detailed floor plans of the house and knew exactly when the family would be in their bedroom. The bomb was professionally constructed and precisely placed for maximum lethality. In 2005, the Florida Attorney General named 4 Ku Klux Klan members as the perpetrators: Earl Brooklyn, Tillman Belvin, Joseph Cox, and Edward Spivey, all officers in the Orange County Clavern. All were dead by the time they were identified, but evidence suggests the conspiracy extended far beyond these 4 men. The precision of the attack, the detailed intelligence required, and the complete lack of consequences for the perpetrators all point to law enforcement complicity. While no direct evidence links Sheriff McCall to the bombing, the timing, 6 weeks after Moore's public call for McCall's indictment, speaks for itself. In 2021, investigators interviewed Broward Hunter, grandson of Jesse Hunter, the prosecutor who handled the Groveland Four retrial. What Broward revealed shattered any remaining illusions about the case. In 1971, while cleaning out his grandfather's law office, Broward had discovered correspondence that proved Jesse Hunter and Judge Truman Futch both knew no rape had occurred. The letters, which Broward shared with contemporary investigators, show that the prosecution was fully aware they were seeking death sentences for innocent men. This wasn't a mistake or a product of the times. It was deliberate, calculated evil perpetrated by officers of the court who had sworn to uphold justice. FBI files declassified in recent decades reveal the full scope of the federal government's knowledge and inaction. Special agents documented every aspect of the case: the torture in the jail basement, the manufactured evidence, the ballistics proof of McCall's attempted murder, and the systematic civil rights violations. FBI photographs show the defendant's injuries in graphic detail. FBI reports conclusively identify the perpetrators of the beatings. FBI ballistics analysis proves McCall shot the handcuffed prisoners. Yet in case after case, federal prosecutors claimed insufficient evidence to pursue charges. Why? Because prosecuting Sheriff McCall would have exposed the entire system of legal terrorism that maintained racial control across the South. The federal government chose to protect the system rather than its victims. The Groveland Four case wasn't an aberration. It was standard procedure. McCall's 28-year reign produced a consistent pattern of violence against black residents. In 1972, he would be charged with kicking mentally disabled black prisoner Tommy Vickers to death. An all-white jury acquitted him after deliberating for just 70 minutes. Throughout his career, McCall faced dozens of investigations for civil rights violations, excessive force, and suspicious deaths of black prisoners. Each time, all-white juries or federal prosecutors found insufficient evidence to proceed. The system protected its enforcers because their terror was essential to its functioning. This pattern extended far beyond Lake County. Across the South, sheriffs like McCall operated with impunity, understanding that federal authorities would document their crimes but rarely prosecute them. The message was clear. Systematic violence against black Americans carried no consequences for white perpetrators. For 72 years, the lies stood as official truth. Walter Irvin was paroled in 1968 and died 1 year later, his name still associated with a crime he never committed. Charles Greenlee was paroled in 1962 and lived until 2012, carrying the burden of a false conviction for 50 years after his release. It took 2 books to finally force a re-examination. Gary Corsair's Legal Lynching, The Sad Saga of the Groveland Four in 2004, and Gilbert King's Pulitzer Prize-winning Devil in the Grove in 2012. These works brought new attention to evidence that had been buried for decades. In 2017, the Florida legislature issued a formal apology to the families. In 2019, Governor Ron DeSantis granted posthumous pardons. But the families wanted more than forgiveness. They demanded recognition of innocence. On November 22, 2021, in the same Lake County courthouse where the original trials had been held, Judge Heidi Davis officially exonerated all 4 men. State Attorney Bill Gladson's motion for exoneration laid out the evidence in devastating detail. The pants allegedly containing evidence of rape tested negative for semen. The prosecutor and judge knew no rape had occurred. The primary witness, Deputy Yates, had manufactured evidence while simultaneously torturing the defendants. The federal government had documented these crimes but chosen not to prosecute. In his motion, Gladson wrote, "I have not witnessed a more complete breakdown of the criminal justice system, nor do I ever expect I will again." Standing in that courthouse in 2021, family members of the Groveland Four witnessed something unprecedented, a legal system acknowledging its own systematic criminality. But this acknowledgement came 72 years too late to save any of the men whose lives were destroyed. The Groveland Four case exposes how racial terror operated not through the actions of rogue individuals, but through the systematic coordination of law enforcement, prosecutors, judges, and federal authorities who chose to protect white supremacy over constitutional rights. Today, when we debate police accountability, prosecutorial misconduct, and federal oversight of civil rights violations, the Groveland Four case provides a historical blueprint for how these systems can conspire to produce injustice while maintaining the appearance of legal procedure. The evidence was always there, in FBI files, court records, and witness testimony. What was missing for 7 decades was the will to confront the truth about how American justice operated when it served the interests of white supremacy. The exoneration of the Groveland Four doesn't just clear 4 innocent men. It indicts an entire system that continues to influence American law enforcement today. Understanding this history is essential to preventing its repetition. In the end, the most chilling aspect of the Groveland Four case isn't the violence of individual actors like Sheriff McCall. It's the systematic nature of the cover-up that protected them. Every institution that should have provided justice instead provided cover for terror. That system didn't die with Jim Crow. It adapted, evolved, and persists in new forms that require constant vigilance to identify and dismantle. The Groveland Four finally received justice, but their vindication serves as a warning. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance against the systems that would destroy it.